Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. I hope everybody's having a great week. It's getting nice and hot and steamy here in Florida. Going out to throw the discs, getting ready for a tournament I have in Daytona in a few weeks. I find myself pushing off the time that I go out to throw later and later and later, simply because it continues to be hot later and later and later. So you just got to get used to it, I guess, because in a couple weeks I'll be over in Daytona. It'll be middle of July, and those tournaments, as you would imagine, take place start in the morning and go into the early evening. It's going to be 2 rounds per day, so I'm going to be out there from 9 in the morning and probably until 5 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock, something like that. So I guess I just got to get used to the heat if I want to play well. But it's been nice. I think getting a little bit better, working on my form, getting a little bit more accurate, not trying to so much strong arm it, but use my entire body to try to get the discs out there. So hopefully I'll be able to do that in a few weeks, because I do not want to go over to Daytona and stink. And I'm also going to be playing in Orlando Labor Day weekend, and I don't want to stink there. I've stunk there the last couple years in that tournament, and it's been a little embarrassing to me. I don't want to do that this year. In other news, I continue to be amazed by the other show that I'm doing with my co-host Melissa Bridges, and that is America's Missing Podcast. Our show actually, and it's only had a couple episodes so far, and we plan to continue to do this show for the foreseeable future because there's a lot of missing people to talk about. We actually made it into the top 150 of news and political shows on iTunes yesterday. They chart, I think, the top 200 there. You can find out what the top 200 shows are in each category, whether it's sports or comedy, news and politics, religion, cooking, you know how they break it down on iTunes. Our show has, I think it reached a high of 137 on there, which, once again, for a new show with only a couple episodes, is amazing. We haven't even had anybody rate our show yet, and already it was that high. So this is something, as you can imagine, that was unplanned for myself and Melissa. We did not see it coming like this. I don't know if it's a quirk. I don't know if it's just blind luck. However, I will tell you that in the news political category, both on iTunes and Podomatic, shows that deal with true crime, disappearances, mysteries, unsolved murders seem to be fairly popular. There's something about that particular genre of entertainment or news that lends itself well to podcasts. Go figure. I don't know. I mean, our missing podcast show is up there ahead of a lot of news people that you heard of. In fact, it's ahead of a podcast that I've mentioned once in a while on here, the Mad Dog and Englishman, because that's a news podcast done by Kevin Williamson and Charles C.W. Cook from National Review, and it's fairly popular. They're fairly well known. They have tons and tons and tons of Twitter followers. They do a lot on social media. Our show is more popular already than their show is, even though I know it's different genre, but true crime and missing people is considered to be news, and that's why we're in that category. We're higher than those guys. Go figure. And it's going to be, I think, a little tough for us to remain there every day right now because it's just a weekly show, whereas a lot of those shows that are up there are daily shows, so it's easier for them to stay in the top 150, top 100, top 50, or whatever. But we're going to give it our best shot. And I think that we're going to continue to get better, and we're going to try to cover these cases as best we can, and hopefully maybe we'll get lucky and somebody will hear one of our shows and know something about a missing person. In that case, will be solved. That would be a dream for both Melissa and myself. So let's get to the show. So I urge you to listen to the show. It plays on the Encore channel on Red State Talk Radio on the weekends. I think it's playing at midnight Saturday and Sunday, something like that. You should go to redstatetalkradio.com to see the schedule for the Encore channel to find out when America's Missing Podcast plays. So my show, this show, the Dentzel Domain, the political show, and you should know that Red State Talk Radio, its numbers continue to go up. So that's going, I think, well on the political side for me and the station as well, not just my America's Missing Podcast, the true crime show that I do. I want to revisit something. I want to revisit and reiterate something from yesterday that I talked about regarding guns and gun ownership and where people should be allowed to bring their guns, take their guns, and what kind of establishments. Because my dad had listened to the show and texted me last night after the show. And he had a different opinion. Let's just leave it at that. And I think his view is probably the more popular one, even in conservative circles, regarding you can't let people go into a club, something like that, if they're gun owners, because you never know what's going to happen. You know, have an argument and the guns get pulled. And I told him what I told you yesterday, is that although you would think that makes sense, and for all intents and purposes, in a theoretical world, it does. I completely agree that it seems to make sense that you get people around with guns around alcohol and problems are going to happen. Makes total sense. The only problem is the facts don't back that up in the United States. They just don't. In those states, whether it's like in Florida where you have to go get your license, you have to take a class, an NRA class, to get your concealed carry permit like I have for my Glock 19, or you have other states like North Carolina where they have open carry and people can take their guns pretty much anywhere they want except probably into government buildings. Or you have a place like a state, I think like New Hampshire or Vermont that I mentioned yesterday, where there are no permits. People can just walk around and I think it's still concealed carry, but as long as they don't expose their weapon, try to intimidate somebody with it, they're allowed to carry their weapon anywhere, and they don't even have to have a license. Like I have a little card that I got, like a driver's license. They don't even have that in some states. They just see that those states have decided that the Constitution says people can own guns, so there's no reason to go out there and start dishing permits out for people to carry them. I see that. I wish Florida was like that. It's not. It's like somewhere in between. Now, we also know that there are states where gun ownership is restricted. New Jersey, California. Throw New York in there, a few other states. Is there any factual evidence that bars and nightclubs in those states where people can carry their guns are any more violent than the bars and nightclubs in those states where guns are restricted? I would say no. In fact, what do we know? The areas in this country where gun ownership is restricted are some of the most dangerous places in the United States. Right? I keep mentioning that. Since I started this show on Red State Talk Radio, it's about 2 years I've been on Red State Talk Radio now. That is a topic that I've continued to bring up even before I became a gun owner. And can I just say one more for the record? I love my Glock 19. Such a great gun. So good. And I'm so ecstatic that my brother Michael now has a Glock 19. It's a green one, which was really cool. And then my dad a couple weeks ago went and got his new Glock 19. He got a Generation 4 one. I have a Generation 3. They're virtually the same gun. Couple differences. So excited all these people in my life now are owning Glocks like I do. And I'm trying to get this woman that I know who has a Beretta to switch over to a Glock. I should just go be a Glock salesman. That's what I should just do. That's what I should do. But getting back to this, we know that the states where guns are restricted are more violent than the states where people are allowed to carry guns. So it seems weird to me then when it gets to a smaller world, getting down to a town, to a building, to a business, just one building, that suddenly those people turn around and say, well, if people own guns, those places are going to be more violent. Flies in the face of any stat that the FBI has. I don't know what to tell you. See, this is one of those ways that I think that too many conservatives start thinking one way and they think it's conservative and they're so worried about safety and what they think people are going to do, and they just throw the facts out the window. Just facts don't matter anymore. It's just what their logic tells them. And sometimes logic, in a theoretical sense, is, what works in theory doesn't work in practice. First of all, that saying was started by Plato, if you really want to know. Ayn Rand talks a lot about that in her writings, in her nonfiction works. This is one of those instances where that is correct. What works in theory, people not being allowed to have guns around alcohol and nightclubs, doesn't work in practice because we know that there are plenty of places where drinks are being thrown back and shots are being bought and people are buying bottles of champagne and people are toting their guns undercover, concealed, and no violence ever happens. Now, I'll still go back to saying, if you are a private business owner, you have a right to decide who goes onto your property and who doesn't. And if you are an anti-gun person and you don't want people with their concealed carry guns on your property, I perfectly respect that. I don't like it, but I know that's your right to be that way. You have your property rights. You have your home. If you know that a friend of yours is a concealed carry permit guy or woman, and they're coming over, you have a perfectly fine point to make with them. If you're carrying a gun, please leave it in the car or don't bring it over. I don't want it anywhere near my house. I don't want it in my house. You have a right as a homeowner, as a business owner, to say that. There's no crime against that anywhere. And I will defend your right to think that way, even though I think that you're wrong. But that's a different situation than just the general idea of people bringing their guns to places where the business owner, the homeowner, has not said anything and maybe doesn't even care. Although I will agree with my father when he says in that text that he thinks that these clubs should just have security undercover, something like that. Well, I predict that is going to start to happen. I said that last week after the terrorist attack happened. In fact, I would guess that there are some club owners out there who were probably already doing that, although I'm not going to say that they armed their security guards. I don't know about that. Maybe in Las Vegas, maybe, I don't know. I'm going to say at least one club in the United States was probably doing that, given how many there are. And I would perfectly support that as well. But let's just not get into this general idea that it should be illegal for people to take their guns into places where no rules have been set up. And I still believe, no matter what Rich Lauer at National Review would say, or what Donald Trump would say, even though he's wavered back and forth, and what all these anti-gun kooks say, that if a couple of those patrons at that club were concealed carry owners and they'd have been allowed to carry their guns into the club, the shooting would have had less deaths and less injury. There is no doubt in my mind about that. If they'd been good gun owners, go to the range once in a while, know how to use their weapons, then that terrorist would have been shot dead by one of those private people, one of those patrons, instead of by the cops. And it would have ended instead in 3 hours with 49 dead. It might have ended in 15 minutes, maybe with only 10 people dead. As I said yesterday, anything less than 49 dead is better. Anything less than 53 injured is better. No matter how you get there. So that's my point regarding it. I wanted to reiterate that from yesterday. Let's move on to something else regarding this the attack. I saw this, very interesting to me. Just caught this. It was on NBC News. If you want to believe it, I know we as conservatives, we hear NBC or ABC, CBS, we need jerk. Oh, they're a bunch of liars. Just going to put it out there. The FBI continues to look into the terrorist background, what he was about, what he was doing in the days, weeks, and months before this attack. Looking into his wife, and there's some conflicting reports there that on one hand, there's a story out there that the FBI has completely lost track of where the terrorist's wife, when she's like disappeared allegedly. On the other hand, there are some reports out there that say that she's fully cooperating with the FBI. Which one do you believe? I don't know. But this story from NBC News is full of facts, if you want to take them as facts, that contradict some of the things that we've been hearing. So I'm just going to talk about them. You can judge them the way you'd want. First of all is the point about his wife. We heard last week that she disappeared and that she knew that it was going to happen. And even in this NBC News story, she has told the FBI that she suspected that her husband might be doing something wrong that night and was trying to contact him. He sent her a text, don't you see what's going on, something like that. And when she tried to get in contact with him, she couldn't get a hold of him. And I'm going to take for granted that that was at the point that he shot his way into that club. And then we heard that she disappeared, but now you hear in this that she's cooperating with the FBI. And so there's that. There's a contradiction, what we've been told for the last week, and then what you read in this story a week and a half later. Also, what's interesting is that it seems this terrorist guy followed the pattern of what happened in San Bernardino, in that he visited the club that night beforehand. To reiterate what happened, he showed up around closing time, around 2 a.m. with his gun, shot his way into the place around 2 a.m. But he had been at the club at Pulse earlier that night until about midnight, then left, then came back a couple hours later. This reminds me of what happened in San Bernardino, where that San Bernardino city employee, shows up for that party that they were having, or some bonding session, one of these team building, whatever it was, a Christmas party / team building conference, whatever it was. He showed up for a little bit, then left. There were a couple people who said, hey, where'd he go? And then an hour later, he shows back up with his wife and shoots the place up. I'm wondering if this Orlando terrorist got that idea from what happened in San Bernardino. That was a light bulb that went off. Is this a pattern? If I had to look into that, to think about it, I'm guessing that in both cases, each of them were scoping out to make sure that the area was clear, that nothing strange was going on. In the San Bernardino case and the Pulse case, that they showed up, checked it out for a while, and said, yeah, these people were ripe for killing. Got to go home, and then I'll be back. The FBI is still trying to figure out what the Orlando terrorist did in those couple hours. He might have gone home. He might have had his weapons stashed somewhere else. Did he go tell somebody else that he was going to do this? Was there an accomplice that egged him on? Was there some other terrorist who was telling him, yeah, go do this? The FBI is trying to figure out where he was for those couple hours, because it doesn't seem right now that he went to the club, went home, and then came back. And granted, it was 2 hours. I'm going to take it doesn't take him 2 hours to go to his home and go back to the club. I'm sure he lived in the general area, or wherever he was staying. Even if he had his place down there in Port St. Lucie, you can't get down to Port St. Lucie and back in 2 hours. You can't do that. So they're still trying to figure that out. So it wasn't like he just showed up there that night and shot it up. He'd been scoping the place out earlier in the night. Now, speaking of how familiar he was with this place, there's also been the popular story that, and this is kind of being pushed by those people who think that he did it partly because he was struggling with his sexuality. Might have been in the closet gay, and being Muslim, that couldn't have been easy. For those people who want to continue to believe that it was some sort of peer pressure or social pressure that caused him to do this, and not his terrorist tendencies, his militant beliefs, his radical beliefs in regards to his religion. Well, now the FBI that's been looking into this for 10 days, and you can imagine that they have, how many agents are probably on this case? Dozens looking at all the different points of view of this, looking at his ties in other countries, looking at his electronic communications, what websites he was going to, was he communicating with anybody else in the United States that might be thinking about doing this, trying to find out the relationship between him and his wife, and what his wife knew, what did his ex-wife know, what is the connection to his father. It's going to take a lot of agents to do all that. A lot of driving, a lot of flying. But in looking at his electronic communications over the last days, weeks, months before the attack, the FBI is saying that this guy was not, I repeat, was not a frequent visitor to this nightclub, despite what we've been hearing out of people that knew him, that he had been there, that he had been drinking, that he was rambunctious, he was belligerent when he would go to that club. We're now finding out, the FBI is finding out, well, maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe he didn't frequent this club as much as everybody thought. I'm not saying that the FBI has gone so far as to say he was never he was never there before, and all of these sightings of him are at that club in the weeks before were rumors. But the FBI is saying maybe he wasn't as common a visitor to that place as we thought, or as everybody thought, as the news that's been out there, all these reporters have thought and have said. See, this kind of stuff gets my attention. And could it be that a lot of this has been a little bit of spin? Could it be that there's been a point of view that's being pushed, and I would not say by conservative people, saying that, well, really, he did this because he was gay? And I talked about this yesterday in regards to the redaction of those documents that didn't end up getting redacted. Redacted is such a weird word. As a writer, I don't think I've ever used that word in any of the books that I've ever written. And I don't know if thinking about the plots, I don't know if I would have had any reason to write that word, but it's such a weird word. I don't know. But maybe we were being told that this guy was a frequent visitor to this place because of those people who wanted to push the in the closet angle and not the terrorist angle. It's very possible. And could it be that sometimes the false story is right in front of our faces and we don't realize it? I thought when I found this NBC News article that I thought it was just going to be more of the same. In fact, the reason that I can't even remember why I even clicked on it in the first place. I think I got to it from hotair.com. There was it said NBC News, and there was a headline. And I said, oh, well, I want to check this out. And I ended up reading a story that I didn't expect. Once again, do you want to believe it? Do you not want to believe it? In some of these cases, it's just my job to put the information out there. I always want you to check it for yourselves and to decide whether you believe it or not. Do you believe what this article says, or do you believe, yes, that his wife is totally gone into hiding from the FBI, all law enforcement? Are you going to believe that he was a frequent visitor to the club, or now that maybe he wasn't as frequent a visitor as everybody thought? Are you going to believe that he just showed up in that club out of nowhere at 2 o'clock in the morning? Or are you going to believe that he was there earlier in the evening? Was he really on those gay dating apps? Was he really friends with or not? Was he really friends with these gay men who went to that nightclub or not? Wow. Is this the kind of story that's going to get more complex before it gets simpler? As I stand here today, 10 days after it happened, it certainly feels that way. And I think this is one more reason that would have been end of last week, that I told you that I'm still not sure, after all of these years of dealing with terrorism, that we know what truly makes these people tick, both the men and the women that do these things. Yes, I do believe that it is caused by their violent tendencies associated with their religion. I believe that's the basis on which all of this happens. However, you also find out that a lot of these terrorists are fairly complex people, just even taking their religion out of it. Right? Whether you talk about the 9/11 hijackers and killers and them going to Las Vegas, and I told you my theory is they were just doing it to get some real good hate going for the American culture. You want to do that? You go to Las Vegas. Likewise with this, maybe he was visiting this place to get a good hate going for gay people. Because it's an abomination, it's a sin. I'm supposed to hate these people, and so I need to kill them. And they're Americans, which makes it even better. But I'm not sure that's everything. It's no different, I guess, than a psychiatrist who gets a new patient, and sometimes you find what the main problem is. Like I said, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'm going to guess this happens. Because I know that I run into this. Well, I guess we all run into this. That we end up having a conversation with somebody, and you think that the conversation is going to go one direction, and then it goes in a completely opposite direction, and you start thinking to yourself, this conversation is more than just what we're talking about. It's like there's an underlying current to it. That you're thinking that the other person is bringing something else to the conversation that they don't want to talk about. I have that happen once in a while in my life with people. A psychiatrist gets somebody in there on the couch, and the psychiatrist maybe quickly realizes what this issue is with this person, the psychosis and the cause, but doesn't fully explain the reason that the person is the way he or she is, and you just have to keep digging. And I think this is one of the reasons that terrorism continues to be a problem for us, not just because we don't fight it hard enough and we don't kill enough of these people, but it also is that I think that probably only 75% understand what makes these people tick. And maybe this story, this NBC News story, is a symbol of that, in that you think you know one thing about him, and maybe it's something different. But I got to go to the break. You're listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
The voice of American conservatism. WRS Digital, Red State Talk Radio.
Real quick during that break, I took a look to see why I checked out this NBC News story in the first place regarding this Orlando terrorist, and I thought, oh yeah, that's the reason I did it. The FBI has found out that the terrorist had purchased airline tickets to be used a couple days after his terrorist attack. So the terrorist attack happened on a Saturday night, Sunday morning. I'm going to guess that the terrorist had a flight on Tuesday or Wednesday of last week, it would have been, to go see his mother. Is she in California because she had some disease and is not doing so well? I forget whether he was going to be going with his wife, or was he going alone? Was he going with somebody else? I don't know. But he had tickets for a couple days after this terrorist attack, which is odd. I think that's why this entire story was written. So here you have a guy who went into a club, shot it up, and there seems to be signs that he thought that he was going to be successful in shooting it up and getting away with it. I mean, I guess that's what your average person would think. And that seems a little outrageous given what we know happened. That really, as soon as he started to shoot his way into the club, there was no way he was getting out of there scot-free. Maybe he comes out alive by surrendering, but there's no way that once he starts shooting his way into that club, there's no way he's making that flight on Tuesday or Wednesday, right? But I think there's something else going on there, and I think that you can equate this to people who commit suicide. In that, what do most people always say about a person who commits suicide? Well, they had everything to live for. They seem to be doing better. Well, they were supposed to meet me. They made plans to meet me for lunch next week, and they commit suicide now. Oh, no, this must be something suspicious. There is a human, and this isn't just with humans, but it's with all animals, that we like our patterns. We like our schedules. Most people do not react well to change. As much people may say that they like work, that you never know what you're going to get every day, the truth is most people work in jobs where they like the monotony of it, so they don't have to have too much drama in their work lives. That's the truth. So in the instances this, we don't know how, maybe the FBI knows, that we don't know when he purchased those tickets. Did he purchase them the day before the attack? A week before? And I think, once again, this is something maybe that we just don't understand what makes these people tick. Could it be that they're not as, I don't know what you want to call it, as deliberate as we've made them out to be? Is that possible? Now, maybe in the case of what happened in San Bernardino, that sounds like something that had been planned for a while. That guy knew that party was going to happen, and he knew exactly what he was going to show up, he was going to leave, he was going to come back, shoot the place up. That was probably the only time in 2015 that all those employees were going to be at one place at one time. And that guy knew it. and his wife knew it too, and they went in and shut the place up. Whereas it could be, regarding what happened in Orlando at the Pulse nightclub on Saturday night a week and a half ago, that the guy had an idea that he was going to do this, but just didn't know when. He'd picked out his target, but wasn't sure when. But when he showed up at the club on that Saturday night, like the FBI says he did, beforehand, 2 hours or 3 hours beforehand, he just decided, didn't matter that we had to go see his mother in a couple days or anything like that. Tonight was the night. Maybe somebody ticked him off. Maybe he was in a bad mood. We just don't know. But he wanted to shoot this place up because his religion told him to do so. And then he personally decided that it was that night that it had to be done. It wasn't his religion necessarily that told him that night had to be it. It was him, his own mind, thinking it had to be tonight. And once again, it goes back to, we can't ignore the human element in any of this, in the planning that goes. Yes, they pick out these targets because of their religion, but how they go about doing it and when they choose to do it is very much dependent on each individual terrorist and the decisions that they make in their own private lives. It's not like they're trying to align a terrorist attack with some special day in Islam to commemorate something as a memorial or anything like that. It's that, yes, their religion motivates them, but the choices that they make to do it are no different than people in their regular peaceful lives making decisions to do things. It's a crime of opportunity, or it's a choice of opportunity. It's no different than that. And so when I hear that the guy had plane tickets a couple days from now, it very well may be that when he bought them, he planned to go on that trip. But then he just decided on Saturday night, tonight was the night to shoot this place up. Oh, well, Ma, just guess I'm not going to see you. My religion tells me, my beliefs tell me that I have to shoot this club up sooner or later, and I, as an individual, am going to pick tonight. And we may find out, as the investigation continues, that we know that this guy was investigated a few years ago, what was it, 2013, 2014, regarding whether he could be a terrorist or not, and the FBI let him go. It could be we find out that the FBI was back on his trail. Maybe they tracked some communications, maybe there are some emails or something like that. And this guy knew that maybe he wasn't going to make it. Maybe he figured that, hey, I'm going to fly to California to meet my mother, but maybe the FBI's on my trail again, and I want to make sure I get this done, so I got to do it now. That's very possible. In fact, I think there is an instance of that in one of these recent terror attacks, not in the United States, but elsewhere, that I have to research that after the show's over, that the terrorists might have carried it out because they thought that they were going to be caught at some point before they could do this. Maybe that has something to do with the Paris attacks. I don't know. I have to think about it. If you're following news like I do, maybe you remember what that was as well, where there was an instance that it seems that they hurried through an attack because they thought they were going to get caught before they could do it. I have to look into that. So there's still a lot of interesting points to this attack, on top of the fact that there's still some people out there who think that the Orlando shooter had an accomplice. And I just don't mean somebody helping him behind the scenes, but there was another shooter at the nightclub. There's nothing that I've seen that shows that. I think that it's very easy to believe that 49 people could be killed by one guy because he has the gun and they don't. And you also have to remember that a lot of these people, I'm sure, did not die necessarily because a bullet entered their body. Had they gotten care at the time they were shot, they would have survived. A lot of those victims, you're going to find out whether they want to release the information or not. A lot of these people bled to death because they couldn't get any care because that guy was in there for 3 hours. If we're going to classify it as people shot and the bullets killed them no matter what kind of medical care they got, we may be able to cut that 49 number in half. Or maybe it's just a third. Could be. Just don't know. And because that's kind of a gruesome detail, I don't know if we'll ever find that out. Let's move on to something else. Let's get away from Orlando. I want to talk about some polls and from Quinnipiac. Is that how you say that? Quinnipiac? Quinnipiac? I have no idea. If they are to be believed, Donald Trump is giving Hillary Clinton a run for her money in a couple states, specifically Pennsylvania and Ohio. In the one state, in Ohio, they're tied, Clinton 40, Trump 40. In Pennsylvania, Clinton's allegedly only ahead by a point, 42 to 41. In Florida, however, where I live, Clinton is winning 47 to 39. Once again, if you want to believe these polls. Now, you don't need to have a Ivy League education. You don't need to be a math professor to realize that those numbers don't add up anywhere near 100%. In fact, one adds up to 83%, another one adds up to 80%, and another one adds up to 86%. So there are quite a few people who are undecided in these polls. I think those are a bunch of Bernie Sanders supporters, who I believe a multitude of them will end up supporting Hillary Clinton. And that is the reason that I think that these numbers aren't really as close as everybody thinks. Hillary Clinton is technically, very technically, still in a race. Donald Trump is not. Now, there are other things going on against Donald Trump that may happen regarding the delegates at the convention, may or may not happen. But election-wise, Trump is not, in competing for votes of the citizens of the United States, Trump is not in a real competition now. Hillary Clinton still is. Bernie Sanders has not suspended his campaign. He's not told all of his voters that he's backing out and he wishes that they would go over and vote for and support Hillary Clinton. When that happens, and it will happen, these numbers are going to cease to be close. And I don't want to hear any Trump supporters tell me that a lot of those Bernie Sanders supporters are going to go over to Donald Trump. That's crazy. And if that's true, then you conservatives who support Donald Trump, you should really begin to see how radical to the left Donald Trump really is. Okay? But there's another aspect to this, and this comes from another poll that was done by Quinnipiac. And it has to do with the Senate race in Florida and in Pennsylvania. And I even talked about Marco Rubio, how he's going. I guess we can mix that in there. Marco Rubio has decided that he is going to try to get reelected for his seat here in Florida. I have not decided yet if he's going to run and be the Republican nominee for Senate in Florida. I have not decided whether I'm going to vote for him or not. I don't like it that he apologized to Donald Trump after attacking Donald Trump like I think the way it should have been done, and then he goes and apologizes like a month ago. I don't respect that. So I'm going, and I'm not part of the Republican Party anymore anyway. But I got some time to make that decision. We'll see what happens. But Marco Rubio, even though he is just, as a rumor, just jumped back into the race here in Florida, he's already 7 points ahead of the Democrat in this state. Now contrast that with Donald Trump being, let me check it again, 8 percentage points behind Clinton. So Marco Rubio is 7 points ahead of his Democrat opponent. Donald Trump is 8 points behind his Democrat opponent. And see, this is the reason that I believe that Donald Trump has no shot to win. No shot. I'd also bring up Pennsylvania. Like I just told you before, a poll showed that Donald Trump was 1 point behind Hillary Clinton at this point in that state. And that gives Republicans, I guess, who like Donald Trump or just the Republican Party a lot of hope. Well, Quinnipiac has done a poll of Pat Toomey, who is a senator from Pennsylvania. Good conservative, has made a couple decisions maybe in the last year that hasn't thrilled some conservatives, but he's probably a better choice than anything the Democrats are going to have if you want to look at it that way. I don't vote in Pennsylvania anymore, so it's up to you people in Pennsylvania. I'm glad I can stay out of that. But Pat Toomey, a poll by the same company that did the poll for Marco Rubio and did these polls, the presidential polls, has Pat Toomey up 9 points in Pennsylvania. 9. Now, if you don't know, any Republican who could win Pennsylvania with a 9-point spread, that's something, given that Democrats greatly overwhelm Republicans in that state as far as registration. So let's go over this again. Marco Rubio in Florida is beating his Democrat opponent by 7 points. Donald Trump is losing to his Democrat opponent in Florida by 8 points. Pat Toomey is beating his Democrat opponent by 9 points. Donald Trump is losing to his Democrat opponent by 1 point. And you Trump supporters still want to tell me that Donald Trump is going to get people from the other side to vote for him, that he's easily the most electable Republican presidential candidate since Ronald Reagan. You're really going to continue to try to sell that to me when he's polling behind Republicans in those states? Are you really going to try to continue to tell me that? Now, I know what you say. Well, those polls, you can't believe them. Well, how do you cherry pick what you want to believe and what you don't want to believe just because it's good news to you? That sounds to me like something Donald Trump would do. As I've tried to tell you, this is going to be a disaster for the Republican Party, and it's the exact reason I got the hell out. In these states, these important states of Florida and Pennsylvania, Donald Trump is polling behind the senators in those states by almost double digits. Almost, if you want to believe the polls. And this is all the while in the presidential polls with a bunch of undecideds. An undecided group that I would say 75% of them are going to go the Democrat way, because I think a lot of those people holding out are Bernie Sanders supporters. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, anything can change. Everything could change tomorrow, or it could change the day after. It could change a month from now, 3 months from now. But there's no proof that that's going to happen. None. And I would say that if you're going to want to pay attention to any polls, it's these kinds of state polls that are probably more accurate than a national poll. When Quinnipiac or some other company is getting out there, not just asking about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, but is asking about the senatorial races, the national state races as well. And you begin to get a picture. And you begin to get a picture that the average Republican polls better than Donald Trump does. And here's what I believe. If Pat Toomey does win Pennsylvania, he's not going to win by 9 points. If Marco Rubio wins Florida, I do not believe he's going to win by 7 points, although I would say that he has a better chance of winning by 7 points in Florida than Pat Toomey has of winning by 9 points in Pennsylvania, simply because I know what the party registrations are in each state. Florida, it's a lot more even than it is in Pennsylvania. So if each of those guys, their numbers are probably going to go down if they win. Say Marco wins by 3, Pat Toomey by 2. Then wouldn't that also mean that Donald Trump's chance of winning the state goes down as well? If Pat Toomey's going to drop by 6 points, wouldn't that mean that Donald Trump's probably, his percentage is going to drop by 6 points once we get to November as well? Wouldn't it? Makes a lot of sense to me. And keep in mind, there's a 15-point spread difference here in Florida between Marco Rubio winning by 8 over his opponent or by 7, and Donald Trump losing by 8 to Hillary Clinton. That's a difference of 15 points. That's crazy. And that's where you see the disaster coming. I got to cover a couple more things, or at least one more thing before we go. Marco Rubio getting back in the race. I already told you, I don't know what I'm going to do regarding November. As not being a member of the Republican Party anymore, I don't feel like I have to vote for anybody I don't want to. I don't have to toe the party line. What frustrates me about this is not just that Marco Rubio's apologized. It's that, can this guy, I'm not saying he can't be a senator or something somewhere down the road, but does he really have to do this? Is the private sector that bad that he can't just go out and get a real job for, let's say, 10 years? Does he really have to run for Senate again? I mean, he's the one that has been complaining over and over and over that he doesn't like being there and he's frustrated. And that was allegedly one of the reasons, if it's to be believed, that he was running for president. And now he's saying, well, you know what? I got to go back and jump in and be in the Senate again. And maybe he's being pressured by the party. They're looking at Florida. It's a win that they have to get. And the other Republicans have been trying to run here. Maybe haven't been doing as well as the party would hope. And they think it's an easy choice to just try to coax Marco Rubio to run again. I get that. But I also believe that for his long-term, his own personal aspirations, I personally think that it would show more character for him if he said, you know what, I appreciate it, and I know maybe I have a little bit of allegiance to the party and what it's done for me, but I got to take a break. I'm going to go out, see what the private sector is. Maybe I'm going to go do this, do that, make some money here, make some money there, which I think he could do, and then revisit the question in 6 years, in 8 years, something like that. He'd still be a very young guy, mid-50s. He'd be fine. But it doesn't look like he's going to do that, and it just reeks of a career politician. It just does. And those are so I'm going to be watching this very, very closely from now until November if he's going to choose to run, and we'll just see. One more thing. Corey Lewandowski gets fired by and I know this story is a couple of days old now, but Corey Lewandowski gets fired by the Trump campaign, and then he goes out there and he's still a lapdog for them. Let's just make this clear. The reason that he did not get fired back in the day 3-4 months ago because of the Michelle Fields incident is because he was not a liability for the campaign of Donald Trump at the time. The reason he got let go now is because Donald Trump is not doing so hot in the polls, and so Corey Lewandowski had to go, which means Donald Trump makes decisions no different than any regular politician. It's all about the polls. It's not about any integrity. So live with that, you Trump supporters, but I got to go. You can find my shows at Podbean, Podomatic, SoundCloud, and YouTube. You can also find them at edwarddentzel.com. Facebook, LinkedIn, you can find me there. You can email me, edwarddentzel@reagan.com, Twitter, Dentzel Domain. Also check out the other show America's Missing Podcast with my co-host, Melissa Bridges. You can find our Twitter handle, Missing Podcast. You can find it on Twitter. Would love for you to follow us. Find us on iTunes and Podomatic. It's been nice talking to you tonight. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.